Hi there, this is the Oak Bay Senior Debating Team. We've got 4 grade 11 students today who are going to be debating the media and its role in democracy. The format that we're going to be using is in 2 parts. The first part looking at our first affirmative speaker, speaking for 4 minutes, introducing the topic that the mass media is good for democracy. The students will be speaking for 4 minutes, introducing the primary topic, and then a 6-minute speech will follow, which will include rebuttal and their contentions, and then the initial speaker will have 2 minutes to rebut and to close the argument. I hope you enjoy yourselves. It should be an interesting debate.
Today we on side proposition strongly believe that this resolution before us, that democracy is good, that the mass media is good for democracy, should and it will pass. I'll be mainly presenting a political argument. The 3 main functions of the mass media in relation to our democratic institutions and to the development and implementation of policies of government. First, the mass media exposes democracy to critical examination. Second, it allows for a broader policy discussion. And third, it exposes corruption, inefficiencies, and ineffective government policies. First off, I'd like to go into my first argument, which is mass media exposes democratic institutions to critical examination. The mass media holds democratic institutions up to a light of scrutiny. It is able to ask those big questions about how democratic institutions are functioning and whether this is in line with our democratic principles, and if it's consistent with the idea of the public good. The mass media is able to ask the big questions about how democratic institutions are functioning and whether it is in line with with the public good and our democratic principles. The mass media is uniquely capable of this examination. An example of this was seen in Canada when the massive discussions at the Meech Lake and also Charlottetown Accords, in which the idea of the separation of powers of government and the impact of Charter of Rights and Freedoms was discussed, and how this was going to affect Canadian citizens. We saw that the mass media presented the arguments pro and also against, which allowed for individuals to understand what was the issues of these talks were being discussed. And this was shown with this amount of mass media and how it affected people's. When we saw in the election results of the Charlottetown Accords, we saw that 70% of Canadians voted. Way better than our federal elections will probably ever get for many years. The second reason why mass media is good for democracy is it allows for broader policy discussion. The mass media can create a national forum in which, for debate in which a multiple of issues can be discussed, such as the wage gap, Indigenous relations, and also our foreign policies. An important way that the mass media can do this is through investigative reporting, shedding light on issues in Canada that may never be discussed. Consider the recent temporary foreign worker program that was brought to light not by government, not by organizations, but by the mass media. And it later showed about what the foreign workers was a role in Canada, whether it was good or bad for Canada. And thirdly, the mass media exposes corruption and inefficient governments. The mass media has investigative capacity and a reach into the Canadian public, and it can expose misconduct. One example of this was seen in the recent Mike Duffy scandal that resulted in a criminal trial. A second example was during the recent BC provincial government employee was destroying emails that were relating to the highway tiers in the transportation ministry. That was contrary to the provisions of the Freedom of Information legislation that we have in BC.
Thank you, Jacob McCauley, for your wise words. Our second speaker is Jonah Van Driesem. Jonah?
Thank you. From my opponent's speech, we see nothing that actually proves the mass media is good for our democracy. In our democracy, critical examination has become softball questions, and the mass media is focused purely on spin in politics, not substance. He talked about the Meek Lake Accord. The debate on that and the ensuing referendum was not a great debate of ideas. It was the same old political campaign with ads for and ads against, destroying character and dividing our country. We also saw this again in the constitutional crisis, where our government was faced with two options, and one was said to be completely illegal and that was never disputed. Much of what we see in the media is only a twist of the truth. The Mike Duffy scandal was not brought forward by the independent media, but indeed by the Auditor General, who looked at the expenses and brought it forward to the public, who made the decision that this was wrong, that he was claiming these expenses. We also saw that the foreign workers program was not brought forward by the CBC, which is under threat of constant cuts by our government, but this was brought forward by an individual who had been abused by the foreign workers program. It is individuals who fight for our democracy, not the media, and a lot of the time, sadly, not our government. Instead of substantive debate on policy, we are still forced to view cynical ads meant to divide us. We use polls to justify policy instead of sound fact. We see this by having a push-through budget, push-through bills that have very little debate. And then we have our leaders' debates, where the consortium, who has the ability to reach the largest amount of viewers in Canada, be completely rejected by the government, who are the policy drivers at the moment in our country. Polls also drive down turnout. We look at the most recent British Columbia election. The NDP was projected to get a massive majority government because young people, who often vote NDP, turned out in record low numbers in that election. We had a fourth straight BC Liberal government, and the NDP actually ended up losing seats. We also barely passed the 50% turnout mark. The government also has the ability to use media access as a way of controlling the media. We look at interviews and such. The Prime Minister only allows for 3 questions to be asked of him. And let's say we have an election year here in Victoria, BC, and the Times columnist finds out that Mayor Helps did something maybe a little iffy, but nothing illegal, and they're going to run the story. But instead, Mayor Helps offers to give a debate on a big issue, and as long as the Times columnist kills the negative story. What do you think is going to be chosen? If we strengthen our public broadcasters, make politicians accountable, and educate people on the great policy issues going forward, we can truly have a media that informs our public and a government that works with them. Right now, we have a government that can manipulate what's being discussed so greatly that the public is suffering. This is starting our democracy to wither, and if we don't change something soon, the damage may be permanent. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that enlightened conversation. We have 2 more minutes for Jacob to close the argument. Jacob?
My opponent sees the media through a narrow lens. You okay, man?
Okay.
In which the entire media is in the pocket of government. This view is entirely out of touch of reality. He insists that papers will be forced to accept these supposed fluff pieces, such as a public transit. I truly believe that an editor will go for the biting pieces in our government. They're going to go for the biting pieces because what sells paper is not fluff pieces about public transit. It is about the biting pieces, but how our government functions and about how democracy is in Canada. My opponent also discussed that the CBC is the only true form of honest media in Canada. as if only one news organization can monopolize the truth in Canada. Canada's media is so diverse and vibrant, and news organizations with different views, progressive and conservative. And there's many examples across Canada, such as the Vancouver Observer or the Rebel Media. Canadian democracy needs a mass media. Thank you.
Hi and welcome back. Our Oak Bay senior debaters are going to continue their conversation on the role of mass media in democracy. For the second part, we're going to be having Marlène de Sepibus speaking for the resolution, followed by Vida Zhang against. We're going to follow the same format again with 4 minutes for Marlène to start. Vida will speak for 6, including a rebuttal, and then give Marlène an opportunity to rebut and conclude the ideas with 2 minutes at the end. Thanks.
Good afternoon. As my compatriot has previously said, we are for mass media and democracy. He has already offered you some points, and I shall bring forth some others. Now, an important thing is that media is free. Now, this is a good representation of the freedom of speech we have in this democracy we live in, but it's also an important thing because it lets bring out truthful information. By the fact that journalists are allowed to go and dig in when invoking the rights of free media, they are allowed to bring up some truth that sometimes people would rather not be giving out. Of course, that is kind of a controversy when talking about gossip magazines, but that's not the issue. So, the way this really helps democracy is when there is a vote for a new leader or a new law, really just any kind of vote. Now, the journalists will be able to go and deep down and make sure that everyone voting knows exactly who or what they're voting for, and not only what a campaigner would like them to believe they are voting for. Now, the use of media for a lambda's political point of view is not only seen in what a journalist or any kind of media will bring out and show, but also in what they cannot show, what they are not allowed to say. For example, something happens in some important place. People are curious, and a journalist arrives to research. If he's allowed to come in, well, all is well. He rates his thing, makes his movie, and everyone is informed of how the country is doing. But now, if he's not allowed, this brings forth that there's something suspicious going on, and that the people included in the issue are not to be trusted as well as we think they should be trusted. Speaking of trust, media, especially oral or film media, TV or radio, are a perfect way to record promises done by politicals. If it is filmed or recorded, there's no way they can say, I did not say it. I will never be able to say I did not do this because you're filming me right now. But let's maybe bring out an example. The United States President of 1996 to 2000, Bill Clinton, he was suspected of having an affair with Monica Lewinsky. Now, he denied it. And later it was discovered that he was saying the truth. No, he was lying. So when that came out, that he was lying, he bluntly lied to everyone while promising he wasn't doing it, he almost lost his presidency. Now, this is how media can help us bring the real truth to the public eye. And more importantly, there are more than one media. Every media has more than one publisher, and in the same way, there is more than one truth. And the truth will be presented in different ways or manners. A stat can lie. A fact can lie, even if you believe in them as a fact can lie. A truth can lie. A stat can lie. And this is how having various medias offering various points of view helps democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Marlene. And Vida will now have 2 minutes that she's going to be rebut before she brings 4 minutes of contentions forward. Vida.
We, on side negative, strongly believe that media is bad for democracy. Before I begin my own arguments, I would like to rebut a few points made by Marlene. Marlene has stated that a fact can lie and a stat can lie. However, I would like to point out that this is not lying. This is merely presenting the same fact from different perspectives. This is merely the different ways of presenting a fact. However, mass media has the power to lie outright to the public's face. Instead of just manipulating the fact to make it look a little bit leaning a little bit differently, the media can have very different ideas about the truth than what it actually is, and therefore misinforming the public. She has also stated that media will help politicians to keep their promises because since everything is recorded, there's no way that a politician can deny what he or she has done. However, I would like to point out that this is also manipulated by the different biases of the media. For example, if media A supports a certain politician, then when the politician makes some juicy promises, the media A will report in full details. But when that politician breaks his or her promise, the media A might choose to downplay the event or even not report it at all. On the opposite side, if media B does not support that certain politician, then they would not report the politician when he or she makes the promise during the campaign, so that people who watch media B only will not be influenced by that promise and possibly vote for that politician. However, when the politician breaks his or her promise, media B can go in full detail on the event and even pull out the footage from before when the politician made his or her promise, which completely destroys the credibility of that politician. Now, I would like to begin my constructive arguments. Today, I'm going to bring forward about how there's corporate influence on the media and how the media can be biased themselves. Firstly, I'm going to talk about how there is a strong corporate influence in the media. Media outlets, especially private media outlets, are largely funded by the advertising fees from corporations. Corporations pay the media outlets for airtime of their advertisements in hope of attracting more customers. The more customers, the more profits they will get. Corporations are profit-oriented. So, say if there is a report of something negative about that corporation, then the corporation is not going to want it to be aired, because once it is aired, there will be a negative effect on the general public, and they might lose customers, which means the losing of profit. In order to prevent the program or the report from being aired, the corporation can threaten the media outlet to report the event or to stop paying their advertisement fees. Now the media outlet is faced with two choices. The first is to report the event anyways and probably lose a huge part of their funding and maybe become bankrupt. or simply do not report the story. Now, I think most likely the mass media outlet will choose to simply not report the event. And now, the mass media got its funding, and the corporation doesn't lose any customers. And it is a happy ending for everybody except for the public. The public is now ill-informed on certain events that they should be extremely informed on, and in the long run, it could influence the general decision of the public as a whole. That means that corporations can be doing some very bad things and still gain a huge amount of profit. Now, I would like to move on to my second point, which is how media would be biased on its own. Most media outlets have a certain political agenda or bias. Most media outlets has a certain political agenda or bias. It has a certain ideology, and it supports the politician with the same ideology as the media outlet. In order to influence the public to vote for that certain politician, they would report events in the politician's favor. For example, I hope everybody agrees that global warming exists because that's a scientific fact. However, different media can choose to report that differently. Some media can say that it is completely not true, and some media can make it so exaggerated that we feel like we're going to die tomorrow. And that concludes my speech.
Thank you very much, Vida. Enlightening indeed. Marlene, your opportunity, 2 minutes to close.
Well, thank you. I would like to point out that the only time I really heard about a lot of people believing that they would die soon is when the movie 2012 went out, and that was a joke. Now, I would like to rebut some of your points. You talked about how corporations may force media because they were advertising in it and wouldn't bring any more money if they published some bad information about this corporation. But that's why multiple medias exist. If this TV can't say this, well, then the other one will say it instead. And so the information will still be released. You also talked about how they are based because of political agendas. Well, same thing. Same thing. When one media will not be able to say something completely pro-green, then another one will say something completely pro-liberal or pro-communist in some kind of events. Well, then the public will be able to see the 3, the 4, the 5, the thousands of opinions presented, and thus get the best ideas of the vote. You also talked about how they could present global warming, and they would present it differently, but you also said that perspectives are not lies when I talked about how stats could not bring out the real truth. Well, you just brought my argument back, so I don't really get what you were saying. And you're talking about how a media can lie. A company is a company, so they can't lie. If they completely lie, they will lose the trust of the people put into them and lose their clients, lose money, and go bankrupt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Enlightening indeed. All 4 of you spoke brilliantly. Oak Bay High School, grade 11 debaters, the media and democracy. Thank you for watching.
Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, June the 2nd. I'd like to thank the volunteer crew and Shaw staff that makes this happen, and the Oak Bay debate team who made who took the first half hour of the show to talk about media and democracy. Our guest in this segment is Brian Gilbert. Brian has been involved in the issue of sewage treatment for years. You've been involved with the Right Plan, Brian, which is pushing for tertiary treatment. It looked hopeless not that long ago, but things I think are looking better. So there is a new process, and how are you feeling about the way things look now?
Yeah, so we're airing now almost a week after the weekend workshops that happened at UVic and the Victoria Conference Centre. Public engagement. This process is now in the public domain, and that is a tremendous change. By keeping it, and it's going to keep on coming back in the public domain. There's another report back over and over and over again. So this iterative process in the public has dramatically changed the nature of this project. I'm feeling very positive about the potential now.
Okay. What happened? I was there on Saturday.
Yes, I saw you there.
What happened at the weekend workshops from your point of view, and what themes were there?
Yeah, well, I'm curious in your thoughts on what you saw too, because seeing it from different points of view. We start off with the attendance. It was really quite amazing to get the attendance. A lot of Saanich and Victoria citizens, some from Oak Bay. There was a large proportion that were new, had not been involved in the sewage debate before. They had these anonymous clickers that they could do a quick survey. So the Saturday event, 35% people had never been involved in sewage treatment before. 41% had been following this for a long time. So you had citizen experts, in a sense, and newbies. And then the Sunday event, more people actually showed up over the course of the day than on the Saturday. Same numbers again. A high proportion of people had never been involved before, and a high proportion that had been following it a lot, and then a few that had been following it the last 6 months. But the other interesting thing is on Sunday, 85% of the people were new to the Sunday event. So you didn't have, a Saturday people. People took time off. It was a beautiful weekend to come out. Hundreds of people. It's amazing to get that public engagement happening. And that is what's changed the nature of this for me. I really see some positive changes in that.
Okay. I was at UVic on Saturday.
Yeah.
We were sitting at a table. I was with just a few people, and there were many tables, talking about sites.
Mm-hmm.
And I was impressed with the expertise of the people who were at my table. And we very quickly made some decisions on sites. It was very easy to do because a lot of good information was presented to us by the experts. So now, but underlying that was the idea that how can you decide on sites when you don't know the technology? Because a very small site in a neighborhood might make absolutely no sense, but if the technology is completely quiet and completely odor-free and the size of 1 or 2 houses, then it could fit very nicely into a neighborhood, possibly.
Yes, that was a common theme. What you just said there about how can they talk about sites without knowing technology, that came back at the report back at the end of the days. People genuinely wanted to know the costs and the benefits of the various technologies in proportion to what was presented in the material. The material was a one size, the more standard baseline of the old CTERA project, but the public was definitely, the theme was tertiary treatment. Just let's get right to it. Let's forget the secondary treatment. We want to treat the water to a tertiary level, which means it's clean when it goes back into the environment. From an economic point, that's an environmental benefit, right? From an economic benefit, that also, in my analysis, means we don't need to have new, long, deep ocean outfalls, which are expensive to build. It leads the option to use the water locally or just discharge into local waterways very directly.
So in other words, if you had a tertiary plant close to the inner harbor, you can discharge what people call clean water.
Reclaimed water.
And it is safe to redeposit that right into the inner harbor. You don't need... Okay.
You need to be treating it to the right level.
Yes.
And the plants go through rigorous testing daily, like Dockside does. Dockside, that plant is tested every day. And their reclaimed water it passes the test beyond their operational certificate every single day, and they've done that every single day since they started operation.
Okay.
So that's the type of level of running operation we expect to have. Not only is it like expect to be clean, but it exceeds that when it goes into the environment.
Okay.
That's what we should have.
Okay.
And yes, then you save your ocean outfall. You don't have to build a new outfall. It does take some time to get the environmental permit, but it's feasible and it can be done fairly quickly, relatively quickly compared to secondary. That was the theme.
Okay.
People want that. That's now a given. And so the next time we see this come back to the public, I expect that that's just going to be part of the normal set of solutions, tertiary treatment.
And can you just explain what does tertiary treatment mean? It means the water that's coming out is clean, but a lot of, I mean, the toxins and everything else, where do they go and how are they dealt with?
Great question. That is exactly the type of questioning we need. Thank you. That's really great, Jack. That's the type of question the public needs to be asking. So on the water side, tertiary is go through all the secondary treatment, which means all the pathogens are looked after and taken out. But it goes through ultrafine filtration to filter out viruses and bacteria and any non-soluble elements, chemicals and stuff, chemicals of concern. But there's still some soluble things can get out beyond that filtration. So you need other treatments like advanced oxidization, ultraviolet treatment, and some others. You need to get it extra clean before it goes. Again, very much like the dockside facility puts out. They put their water into the nature right there. There's a beautiful nature park. The other thing is now the residuals, and you have to deal with the residuals. They're full of all those pollutants that we didn't want to get rid of.
Residuals is what's left over.
Yeah, the sludge.
Okay.
And this is what the right plan is looking at. As I mentioned last time we were on this segment, a vendor came forward that's proposing gasification. Gasification is a means of very, very economically, completely destroying the pollutants and converting them to energy and a revenue stream at the same time. So this is now the technology we need to have experts come in and tell us more about.
Okay, so let's take a pharmaceutical. I've got a pharmaceutical, I don't want it anymore, I throw it down the sink, it's going into our sewage system, and you're saying that a good system can take that pharmaceutical
Out of the water.
out and
Or destroy it as it's going through the last phases.
and kind of just magically remove it. It's gone.
Well, it's filtered out,
Okay.
and the filtering process brings it into the residuals, the sludge.
So
Okay.
now you've got the residual, but it's still there.
Yes.
And what am I going to do with it? Because it's there as a residual, it's dangerous. We don't want it on the land. We don't want it on the water.
And
we don't want it in the air.
We don't want to incinerate. We don't want
Yes.
to burn it. That's right. And
So
don't
we
want to spread it around.
gasify.
Gasification is that process I explained last time, which just converts it to energy. 95% energy, 5% inert ash. It's just super high temperature. It is not a burning process. It's a vaporization process.
Okay. And it
so
works.
yeah, that does it. It gets rid of, turns anything organic into carbon and converts it. The only thing that would be left would be a heavy metal. Those don't get gasified, and there's very few of them. And by the way, back to the pharmaceuticals and dumping it down the drain, we have a great source control program here. In CRD, we do good. We actually recover thousands of kilograms every year in pharmaceuticals through at the pharmacy. It's a good program. But it's not so much the pharmaceuticals we drop down the drain, it just comes through our body and other things that we have to have, or hospitals and things. So there are so many chemicals of concern that happen. We're producing more all the time. Even though we start to ban some, like microplastics are finally starting to be talked about being banned, there's now microfibers, as I said, off of our fabric. And so there's more coming all the time. So tertiary treatment, public expects that. Now we need to deal with them. And the best solution we've heard about is gasification. And that's what we're really looking forward to having the next round of discussion, bringing in these experts to tell us more about it. It's a complex process. It's simple and complex. If it's done well, it's simple. If you get the right mix, you get the right push of the right feedstock in, you have a demand consuming the energy, it's simple. But when things aren't designed well, then it can be complex.
Do you need something the size of a football field in order to do this?
No, that's
Okay.
a great question too, Jack. I understand
Wow.
these are about, these are really excellent. They're about 10 feet square and I think 3 meters tall. So So this is a module. They're suitable for very small communities, and then you just chain up a number of these. They're modular.
Right.
So if you want 6, the estimate I had was about 10 of these units, maybe 8 to 10 units would be necessary for the whole region. So they could be all in one central plant, or they could be distributed where they could be used, where you could use the energy, such as, say, a greenhouse growing food.
Okay. What was your feeling about all of this a year ago?
Oh my gosh, it was optimistic, but boy, it was just, we couldn't seem to kill the old plan. There were so many flaws in that plan. It is such a relief, and we have dodged a major $2 to $3 billion bullet.
Okay. And do you feel that that is actually, it's gone? We hope.
I'm feeling extremely optimistic. Yes,
Okay.
the success is on the horizon.
And I'm very, very glad to hear that.
Thank you. Thank you.
So I guess we should thank a lot of people who've worked very hard to make this happen.
Mayor Atwell for winning his election was key. The way Esquimalt handled the whole situation, the way that Lisa has now taken charge, we would be nowhere without that leadership. That's what we've needed, leadership. Someone to really engage the public, bring in the technical community, and just get the ball rolling. And now that it's positively rolling, this is where we need the public still to get in. Mistakes can be made. This is a huge project. We really need the public to get up to speed a little bit and be part of it so we don't make some big mistakes.
Okay. Yeah. Brian Gilbert, thank you very much for all the work you and so many others have done over the past years.
Yeah.
And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back. It's June 2nd. This is segment 3 of Citizens Forum. Our guest in this segment is Calvin Cook, and we're going to be talking about what's happening at Shawnigan Lake. Calvin is part of the Shawnigan Residents Association, and maybe you can just briefly tell us what's going on there.
Well, thanks again for having us on, Jack. This is with regards to the permit to put contaminated dump site at the headwaters of Shawnigan Lake. It's a 50-year project, and the proposal is, the permit has been granted, and they're now authorized to dump up to 100,000 tons a year for 50 years or 5 million tons of contaminated soil at the headwaters of Shawnigan Lake.
And when you say contaminated, it can be very badly contaminated.
Yeah, I mean, that's the, most people are familiar with Julia Roberts and the movie that she did several years ago. In Hinckley, California, there was contaminated soil by Pacific Gas and Energy, multi-million-dollar lawsuit won by the character that Julia played. The residents, of course, the money that they won was never sufficient to compensate them for the damage that they suffered. But the good news for those residents is that cleanup's still going on. But we can take all that contaminated soil up in Shawnigan Lake and put it above our lake. There's no restrictions on where this material can come from, and very few restrictions on what type of material can be dumped there.
Yeah, so Shawnigan Lake is in very serious danger, and thousands of people draw their drinking water from it.
Correct.
Now, CFAX Radio was reporting last week, the owner of the site, saying the science is clear, there's suggesting that there was no problem. What is the science?
Well, unfortunately, Jack, this boils right back down to what we have as the professional reliance model that the BC government has been using for the last several years. And this is the professional reliance model that was just under severe criticism by our BC Ombudsperson. She made 25 recommendations, of which 24 have been promised to be followed up on. But really what that means is that rather than having our own scientists do a peer review, we just accept the proponent's science. And in this case, the Active Earth, the engineering firm that came up with this proposal, has never done this type of proposal before. Their original claim that this site was on 75 meters of impervious rock, which would protect the citizens of Shawnigan. Certainly that has been under a great deal of criticism. That criticism comes from not only the 9 experts that we hired to testify at the Environmental Appeal Board hearings, but also at 2 individual scientists within the actual Ministry of Environment themselves question that science. 3 days before the Environmental Appeal Board hearings started, the proponent introduced another scientific report saying that yes, the rock was severely fractured and that it wasn't an impervious rock layer. Active Earth also failed to do the most basic engineering site analysis, which was to check on the wells that were in the area. Active Earth, the engineering firm that drew up this system failed to identify the type of material that they'd use, the liner system. They said that it would be adequate to provide protection for the citizens of Shawnigan Lake into perpetuity. We brought in a scientist that disputed that.
How thick is this liner?
If you were to take 2 tunis and stack them, it's slightly less than that.
So 5 million tons of toxic material, toxic material mixed in with soil, and this is the liner that's going to protect.
A couple of things have happened that have never happened in any other site, Jack. Is typically a contaminated site is perhaps an area that needs remediation, so the site is remediated and then they turn it into a contaminated site. In this case, for the first time in North America, we have a pristine site that's being turned into a contaminated site.
So why does Christy Clark and her government want to take the risk, and it's not even a risk because it's 100% certainty that the material, the 5 million tons, is up here and Shawnigan Lake is down here. I mean, there's only one place where it's going to go.
Jack, the science is proven that the contaminants will outlast the engineered solution. And what the citizens of Victoria fail to understand is that it's actually closer to Victoria's water supply than it is to Shawnigan's water supply. CRD has just recently taken up on this, wants to do further studies. All along, the suggestion has been, well, there's no proof of connectivity, and all we're saying is that there's no proof that they're not connected. And is it worth the risk? And you mentioned our government, and I think that any time we have a democratically elected government that's making decisions that negatively impact thousands of people for the benefit of very, very few, surely that's not good governance. And that's what we're asking for. We're asking for leadership, someone to step up and say, no, this is the wrong place for this. The science is clear. It does not meet site suitability. What the Environmental Appeal Board said, we understand the site isn't suitable, but based on probability, we will rely on an engineered solution. The Mount Polley disaster is a classic example of what happens when we rely on an engineered solution. We're not willing, the citizens of Shawnigan Lake are not willing to accept that risk. And I think it's really important that the citizens of Victoria understand that their water supply could also be at risk.
So how far is the site from Shawnigan Lake?
About 5 kilometers.
And how far is it from Souk Lake, which is where we draw our drinking water from?
About 4 kilometers. It's actually only 2.1 kilometers from Luba Lake, which feeds directly into Souk Lake. It is of concern. And again, when we ask ourselves, what are the risks? What are the benefits? Well, the risk is fresh, clean drinking water. Time and time again, our government says that they are there to protect us. Jack, I'm raising money. We're gone to the Supreme Court of BC now to challenge our Minister of Environment, the Ministry of Environment, the very people that we rely on to protect our clean water. Shouldn't there, if there's any question at all, shouldn't that be the one ministry that steps in and says, no, there's a risk to the citizens of BC, there's a risk to clean water? Shouldn't we be able to rely on that ministry?
Who is the Minister of the Environment?
It's Minister Pollock, and we took a delegation, we met with her, and frankly, to be very frank, I was extremely disappointed in her attitude. We went in with business leaders, we went in with the headmaster from Shawnigan Lake School, a world-class facility. Next year they'll celebrate their 100th anniversary, one of the finest educational institutes in North America. And he said, in his own words, that this permit would be a death knell for that school. It's the largest employer in our area. A tremendous, tremendous history, a tremendous future being placed at risk. For what reasons? We don't know that, Jack. There is no benefit to the community. We don't get crosswalks, we don't get parks, we don't get revenue, we get nothing out of it. And yet, as a community, we're asked to assume 100% of the risk.
So once again, we have to ask the question, why is Christy Clark doing this? Not only to the people of Shawnigan Lake, but to the people of Victoria, because this dump is 4 kilometers from Souk Lake, where this city gets its drinking water from. What has been the reaction? I mean, there's been nothing in the media about this. What is the reaction of our water department and the CRD towards this toxic
What they're going
site?
to do is they're going to do further studies into it to try to determine, and the difficulty is, of course, we're talking about an underground aquifer, and nobody knows how that
But if nobody knows, then that's exactly the problem. Nobody knows.
And that becomes the issue, is why take that risk? This Cowichan Valley Regional District, when they heard about this original application, offered $100,000 to do a study to find a more suitable site. Now we understand nobody wants these in their own backyard, but certainly at the headwaters of a designated community drinking watershed is the last possible place it should be located. And what we want the people of BC, the citizens of Victoria, to understand is that if it can be put there, it can be put anywhere. Anywhere where you have a gravel pit is now a candidate for one of these sites, and we're saying that we can't, that professional reliance model is broken. What we have to do, if we want these sites to go in, we have to design them from the ground up. The engineering firm, their water treatment facility that they proposed for the site, the very first shipments they brought in contained salt, sodium. Their system wasn't designed to handle it. They would have discharged sodium or salt into Shawnigan Creek, wiping out that entire system. It was our scientists that we paid for, that we had testify at these hearings, the Environmental Appeal Board hearings, who testified that that system wouldn't work. So they said, well, we'll change the design. And the Environmental Appeal Board says, because it's a new engineering firm, there's bound to be growing pains and growing problems. Can we afford the risk? Can the people of BC afford to have this type of engineering, this type of science, placing our fresh water at risk?
So what's happening right now? Is waste material being placed at the site now?
Currently it is. It's on a management pad. Well, it will be going into containment cells. The other crazy part about this is that the site is only 20% dug. They've got another further 80% of material to remove, so it will be active blasting in that site, which has never occurred next to these containment sites. There are a number of very interesting questions as to what's gone on here, and that's what we're digging for. Currently, the Shawnigan Residents Association has applied to put this for a judicial review to the BC Supreme Court, and that's what we're waiting for now, is a judge to be appointed to hear our appeal of that permit.
Will this be stopped, the dumping of toxic material at the site while the court process takes place?
It's unlikely that we'll be able to do that, but the Cowichan Valley Regional District has also applied to the Supreme Court based on rezoning, because the land isn't zoned for that, and they will try for an injunction to prohibit material from being brought onto that site. It's important that people understand during those Environmental Appeal Board hearings, that engineering firm never testified, they never stood to be qualified as experts, and they were never cross-examined on their evidence. Their evidence was merely taken, where the evidence that we presented was not given any weight, even though we had qualified experts and were subject to cross. It's precedent setting within Canadian law if this decision stands. And quite frankly, Jack, the citizens of Shawnigan Lake and of our drainage, all those 12,000 people who depend on that in drinking water, will not allow that to happen. We will have this permit overturned.
The Environmental Appeal Board sounds kind of like a pathetic joke. Is it any better than that?
Well, Jack, we certainly feel there were shortcomings, and we're now waiting the opportunity to prove those in court.
So what's happening as we speak? What's the next step?
The next step will be a judge will be appointed, and we will review with him a judicial review with the proceedings from the Environmental Appeal Board.
How quickly?
We're hoping to have the judge appointed within 90 days, and then those actual hearings should take between a week to 10 days.
And while we're waiting, truck material is being trucked into the site.
Correct.
Okay. We're out of time. This is, I mean, what can you say, but this is completely insane. The people of Victoria are at risk. The people of Shawnigan Lake are certainly at risk. Calvin, thank you very much for coming on, and thanks to the people of Shawnigan Lake for fighting this so hard, and thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Well, welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum. It's the Walter and Jack show without Walter. It's June the 2nd. Just a few issues I'd like to cover. I saw this just a couple of days ago. Somebody sent me an email. It says, Swedish dads told to take 3 months paternity leave. And it was talking about how Sweden and many countries support families, which is so important, especially in these days when, you know, families are having tough times. It just says, of the 38 countries represented in a 2013 Pew study, the United States is the only country to not offer mandatory paid leave for parents. Many of the countries featured in the study, such as France, Germany, Hungary, and Finland, offered a median of 13 months of leave for new mothers, which is great. In Sweden, parents are entitled to 480 days of paid paternal leave, and 60 to 90 of those days, of the 480, are reserved for the fathers. And I mean, if you're going to support families, it just sounds like a great and wonderful thing to be doing. We seem to be in Canada moving in other directions, but I think those are the directions we should be moving in. Can we afford it? Of course we can. We can't afford not to do it. I got this as well. This is Chris Hedges, who's a well-known commentator, and Robert Scheer, an author and journalist, discuss the culture of violence, again, in the United States, and talking about, well, Chris Hedges says, talking about the dropping of the atomic bombs in Japan, I think it's very important that you wrote that it was the bombs were dropped on a non-military zone to send a message to the Soviet Union. And Scheer says, yes, it's the greatest act of terrorism the world has ever seen, the dropping of these bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There was absolutely no need for it, they say. And we have to face the fact that our great neighbor to the south, and this has nothing to do with the people of the United States, but the government of the United States has been for 50 years the #1 terrorist nation in the world. And Mr. Harper is their best friend. We've got to be moving away from them, and we've got to bring Canada back to what it can be. There was a story just recently, it's happening right now, about the destruction of emails by the BC government, by people within the BC government, regarding the Highway of Tears case. A whistleblower has come forward saying he was ordered to destroy emails, and when he refused, the emails were destroyed anyways, and he was later fired. We really have to ask the question, when governments have so much power and when politicians have so much power in our system, who oversees the overseers? Who oversees Christy Clark and her government when they start doing things like this in violation of the rules and the laws? How do we stop them? This is of fundamental importance. The people have got to have a way to stop corrupt politicians from doing these kinds of things. We're out of time. Thank you for watching this issue of Citizens Forum.